The invitation is not to leave this series with perfect answers. The invitation is to stay connected and to prioritize that connection. Connection to yourself, connection to other people, connection to what restores you to meaning, to joy, connection to the parts of life that help remind you what it feels like to be fully human and fully alive. Welcome to Oxygen for Educators. I'm one of your hosts, Michelle Kinder. It's our hope to bring you thought-provoking, unscripted conversations full of actionable ideas to fuel your important work in the world. Thanks for tuning in. This space is for you. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Michelle Kinder, and this is actually the final episode in our series, Radical Hope, Inner Work with a Ripple Effect. Over the course of this series, we've explored the nervous system, self-compassion, coping flexibility, grief, belonging, meaning, joy, and what it takes to stay connected to ourselves and stay steady during difficult times. And today I want to bring those threads together through the idea of building a personal mental health map. And the aim here, to be clear, is not a perfect plan, a rigid formula, or God forbid, another self-improvement project. It's just a map, something that helps you recognize what it is that grounds you, what drains you, what restores you, what your individual signals are, if things are starting to move away from center, what it is that helps you reconnect to yourself, and what allows you to sustain both your well-being and the work that you're here to do. Many of us are moving through life without a clear understanding of what actually helps us stay well. We know how to push through, we know how to meet expectations, we know how to care for other people, and we know how to function under pressure, but we don't always realize we're disconnected from ourselves until the disconnection becomes impossible to ignore. And one of the reasons getting to know your own internal landscape matters so much is because that awareness alone changes things. When we begin recognizing our own patterns earlier, we often stop abandoning ourselves quite so quickly. We can intervene sooner, we can rest sooner, reach for support, set limits, and protect what restores us sooner. And those small shifts change trajectories over time. So that's part of what I hope this episode offers. Not pressure to overhaul your entire life overnight, but an invitation to begin paying closer attention to your own experience with more honesty, more compassion, and more intention. Because human beings are more adaptive than we sometimes remember, and our lives can become more inhabitable. A huge part of building a mental health map is learning your own signals. So, what is it that happens in you when stress starts rising? What is it that changes first? Every one of us has patterns. For some of us, overwhelm looks like anxiety. For others, it looks like numbing out. Some become intensely productive, some withdraw. Some lose patience, some lose perspective, some stop doing the things that normally help them feel connected to themselves. One of the most useful things we can learn is how to recognize our earlier signs instead of waiting until complete collapse. Maybe it's that music has disappeared from your life, or things start feeling like an obligation that you once enjoyed. Maybe that inner critic is just getting louder and louder, or you notice that you stop returning texts. Those check-in texts from friends sit longer and longer and longer without a response. Maybe your body starts sending you signals that your mind keeps trying to override, and it's having to turn up the volume because of that tendency to override. I've worked with so many people who normalized stress for so long that they stopped recognizing they were struggling until their body forced the conversation. And the great news is that earlier awareness creates more choice. Once we begin noticing our patterns sooner, we can often respond before we get completely depleted. And it certainly is not any kind of promise that life becomes easy, but it really does change how we experience the hard, because it means we stop waiting for crisis before offering ourselves care. And that shift can make a huge difference in the quality of our lives. One of the most practical things we can do is learn to stretch out the space between stimulus and response. Viktor Frankl wrote, "Between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space is our power to choose." I think about that line all the time because many of us are moving through life with nervous systems that are already overloaded. A difficult interaction happens, an email comes in, someone disappoints us, or we feel criticized, rejected, overwhelmed, or unseen. And we're not even choosing, it's just a reaction because that space between stimulus and response is so compressed. We're not really even responding, we're just reacting. We want to quit or lash out, over explain. We want to fix everything immediately or say yes when we mean no. Or we find ourselves making some huge decision from a flooded state. So sometimes the most protective thing we can do is simply slow the sequence down. Slow the sequence down and get a little more space between stimulus and response by taking a walk, by sleeping on it, by talking to someone who's grounded, just waiting. You've heard from some of the folks we've interviewed talk about the 24-hour rule before you'll say yes to something, just waiting, giving your nervous system time to settle before attaching huge stories to how you might be feeling. Because when we get dysregulated, our perspective narrows. But when there's even just a little more space, we tend to make wiser decisions. And wiser decisions create more sustainable lives over time. Another important part of a mental health map is learning what actually restores you, not what sounds good in theory or what works for somebody else online, what it is that genuinely helps you reconnect to yourself. And one of the encouraging things about the nervous system is that it responds to small moments of safety, beauty, connection, creativity, and rest, which means we do not necessarily have to transform our entire lives overnight in order to begin feeling more connected again. There's actually a massive payoff with just raising that awareness and making the intentional commitment to start prioritizing our well-being, getting on the path. There's massive and instant payoff, even though the path is really a lifelong path. But the process often starts much smaller. You know, baby things that can be hard to come by, but easier to come by when we prioritize them, like better sleep or taking a walk, playing that music that has an impact on your sense of hope or sense of well-being or sense of connection, sunlight, more honest relationships, less noise, more boundaries, just intentionally going toward those moments and those spaces and those people where your shoulders drop a little without you even realizing it. Tiny shifts accumulate and they change the experience we're having. We underestimate how impactful these small forms of care can become over time because what we repeatedly practice shapes our experience of being alive. And once we begin recognizing what restores us, we often become more intentional about protecting it. I also think it's worth saying out loud that many of us have unknowingly built identities around exhaustion. Especially vulnerable to this are caring, capable, dependable people, people who are used to being the helper, the strong one, the steady one, the person who can always carry more. And our culture rewards this. It really rewards this for educators. We receive praise for over functioning all the time, but eventually the body keeps paying for what the mind is trying to override. So, one of the most important shifts we can make is recognizing that constantly operating beyond our limits is not sustainable strength. And awareness creates the possibility of doing things differently. We begin noticing. We notice the pace we're keeping. We notice the cost of constant self abandonment, the environments that drain us, the relationships that regulate us, and the habits that either restore or deplete us over time. And once we begin seeing those patterns more clearly, we can start making different decisions. We can become more honest about our limits, more thoughtful about where our energy goes, and more protective of what helps us stay connected to ourselves. And over time, that changes the quality of our lives. Another important part of a mental health map is recognizing that human beings regulate in relationship with each other. We influence each other constantly. Some people help your nervous system settle, some leave you feeling more fragmented. Some relationships create chronic stress, and some relationships help you feel more grounded, more open, and more like yourself. Many adults are more exhausted from constant pressure to perform than they realize it, from holding it together, from managing perception, being endlessly capable, trying to earn belonging through usefulness. And this is why those safe, come as you are relationships matter so much. Because around those people, your body no longer has to work quite so hard. You can tell the truth. You can be uncertain. You can be struggling. And you can exhale in all of your humanity rather than trying to keep it all compartmentalized. One of the hopeful things about this is that relationships can become part of healing too. We often begin feeling more regulated simply by spending time with someone who is grounded, honest, compassionate, and emotionally safe. That's co regulation. Sometimes another steady nervous system helps us access grounding that feels unreachable on our own in that moment. And we can underestimate how life-changing it can be to have even one relationship where we no longer feel like we have to hold everything alone. And it's something human beings need throughout life. I think we often wait until we're already in crisis to reach for support. But support works best when it exists before collapse. And building a mental health map often includes identifying who helps me feel like myself, who helps me regain perspective, Who helps my nervous system settle instead of escalate? And one of the beautiful things that happens when we begin building healthier relationships with ourselves is that we often become more capable of building healthier relationships with other people too. We can be more honest, we can be more boundaried, more present, more intentional, and that is felt in our relationships. One of the things I worry about in conversations around mental health, like this one, is that it can sometimes become so focused on coping that we forget we are also meant to live. A lot of adults are functioning, meeting obligations, taking care of everyone else, managing logistics, and responding to constant demands. And they've become disconnected from experiences of aliveness. And when that disconnection lasts long enough, life can start feeling very flat. And I also think it's important to say that many people are trying to heal and reconnect to themselves inside environments that are still actively exhausting them. We're living in a time of enormous stimulation, uncertainty, pressure, emotional labor, and fragmentation. And sometimes exhaustion is not evidence that you're failing. Sometimes it's evidence that you have been carrying too much for too long with too little support. And recognizing that context matters because self compassion becomes much more possible when we stop interpreting every struggle as personal inadequacy. The encouraging thing is that aliveness often returns gradually through small moments of reconnection. We do heal. Capacity can return. Joy can return. Creativity and presence can return. It's all there for us to reclaim, and we can reclaim it in small moments of reconnecting to ourselves and reconnecting to each other through many small moments of care, honesty, support, beauty, rest, meaning, and reconnection. And sometimes what changes us is not one massive transformation. It's like finally sleeping enough or finding a relationship where you can be your whole self, creating better boundaries, laughing again, making something, getting outside more, realizing that you don't have to earn rest, and beginning to build a life that you can actually remain present inside of. We are seduced into postponing aliveness. I'll rest later. I'll enjoy life once things calm down. I'll reconnect with myself after this season. But the seasons of pressure keep replacing one another, which means if we are not intentional, entire years can pass where we are mostly surviving life instead of inhabiting it. So, one of the questions that's worth asking is, what helps me feel most alive? Not most impressive or most productive, most alive. What reconnects me to awe, to joy, to presence, to feeling actually like in your skin, all the way moved into your body, not 50 to 70% dissociated, which is true for a lot of us a lot of the time. Once you recognize all of the things that build out your mental health map, protecting those experiences is not frivolous. It's part of how we remain connected to ourselves and to our purpose, to our work in the world. So maybe one of the invitations in this episode is simply to begin paying closer attention to your own life not judgmentally and not as another thing to optimize, but with curiosity and honesty. What are my early signals? What tends to happen to me when I become overwhelmed? What restores me afterward? What is it that's consistently draining me? And what is it that helps me feel more grounded and a greater sense of agency in my own life? What pace of life allows me to remain present inside my own experience? And what brings me alive? And one of the encouraging things about building this mental health map is that we often discover we do have more agency than we realized. Obviously, not total control, but certainly influence over our rhythms, our boundaries, our relationships, our attention, our pace, our environments, and the kinds of support that allow themselves to really become part of our ecosystem. Awareness changes things. We begin intervening earlier, recovering faster, making more intentional decisions. So we are creating our experience rather than life just happening to us. And we are protecting what matters sooner because we've identified it and we've identified the earliest signals of when the wheels are starting to come off. And those small changes accumulate over time. Over time, many people discover that they are no longer living quite so reactively. They recognize their limits earlier, they recover more quickly, they become more intentional about what they say yes to, and they realize that everything keeps turning, even though they didn't say a reactive yes that extended them even further outside of their comfort zone. And they become more protective of what restores them, more capable of staying present for their relationships, their work, and their actual lives. And while those shifts may seem small individually, together they can fundamentally change our experience of being alive. One of the kindest things we can do for ourselves is to stop expecting that we should automatically know how to navigate difficult lives without support, reflection, awareness, or care. And we also need to keep in mind that our mental health maps evolve. What grounded us 10 years ago may not ground us now. Different seasons ask for different things from us. And part of wisdom is learning how to keep listening. So, the invitation is not to leave this series with perfect answers. The invitation is to stay connected and to prioritize that connection to yourself, connection to other people, connection to what restores you to meaning, to joy, connection to the parts of life that help remind you what it feels like to be fully human and fully alive. Because radical hope is not denial. It is the decision to keep tending your inner life even in difficult times, to keep choosing connection over disconnection, awareness over autopilot, and humanity over performance, and to trust that small moments of care, honesty, courage, rest, beauty, and reconnection really do shape the way we move through the world. So, thank you so much to all of you who have been part of this series. Thank you for allowing us into your walks and your commutes, your classrooms, your grief, your healing, your reflection, and your becoming. And thank you for continuing to do the courageous work of remaining human in a world that can make that very difficult, because the way we care for our inner lives shapes the way we show up for students and for other people. And it shapes our capacity to sustain the work we are here to do. And that ripple effect extends farther than we often realize. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week with an interview. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Oxygen for Educators. Please like, share, and follow, and if inclined, leave us a 5-star review so that we can keep making content for you. Let us hear from you if you know someone we should interview or a topic we should cover.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the guest and host and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any organization. The content is provided for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended as professional advice. Listeners are encouraged to use their own judgment and seek appropriate professional support when needed. Oxygen for Educators, its host, and production partners are not responsible for any actions taken based on the information shared in this podcast.